Well, Jay, what are some of your, or were some of your initial impressions?
Thanks, Tom. I hadn't seen this movie in a while, so when you reached out and asked us to put up the original Beverly Hills Cop against Axel F, I was definitely intrigued by what I was going to see. And first of all, it's been established that I have worked in the film industry before. One of the things that's very interesting is not often do you see the first star who's attached to the project end up making that movie. I saw this when I was working on a movie called The Perfect Storm. And initially, the captain of the boat was supposed to be Nicolas Cage. Then he fell out. And then after that, it was supposed to be Mel Gibson. And then he fell out. And then we ended up with George Clooney. So there is a similar progression here on Beverly Hills Cop. Initially, it was supposed to be Mickey Rourke. Then he fell out of the movie. And then after that, Stallone and his muscles were supposed to be there. And then he fell out. And ultimately, it ended up with Eddie Murphy. And this was supposed to be a real, action tough guy movie. And Murphy, if we look at his series at that point, he had done 3 movies up until that point. The first one he did was called 48 Hours, when he played this smart talking cop, Billy Valentine, who got out of jail and had to find a missing bag of cash before the 48 hours expired. After that, we had Trading Places, where Eddie is just brilliant, just off the cuff, a lot of comedian, a lot of comical stuff, and he just stole those scenes along with Dan Aykroyd and Jamie Lee Curtis. And then this brings us to his current movie at the time, which was Beverly Hills Cop. And, besides Eddie Murphy coming out of the gate with 3 big hits, he was also a huge hit on Saturday Night Live. And this was the period, the kind of dark ages when Lorne went away. And there really wasn't much to say talent-wise, but the 2 people who kind of saved the day were Phil Hartman and Eddie Murphy. So it really wasn't surprising that they wanted to not only bank on Eddie Murphy and his comedic timing and his sense, but really to take this movie, which was supposed to be a big action film for Stallone, and to turn it into something that Eddie Murphy could really sink his chops into. And he really, at the time, his role was being the smartest guy in the room, but he was also the guy who had the least amount of power. And when he turned this around, it turned into box office gold.
It certainly did, and it was really interesting, Jay, for me to rewatch. Certainly Beverly Hills Cop, because now in 2024, you forget what literally a breath of fresh air Eddie Murphy was. Mm-hmm. And we'd all seen him on Saturday Night Live, but this really took it up to an entirely new level. And the thing that I remember as much as the wisecracking, fast talking Axel role that he had were the just brilliant, not cameos, but really small roles. Damon Wayans, Vincent Poche. I know I just butchered his name, but
Show.
Yes, he was fabulous, and Serge, Cappuccino, and he was great as well, and the police captain in Detroit, who was actually a real cop at the time, his temper tantrums were great. And apparently he was just playing himself, which is the best kind of acting you can have. But the action, that opening scene where the heat is on and he's in the back of a 18-wheeler and a 40-foot trailer with stolen cigarettes, whipping around off of a chain. I'm sure that whoever that stunt actor was tied up well and harnessed in, but it still looked great. And those kinds of stunts, we get a lot of CGI now, and that was a real stunt, and that was a real guy doing it. And I always appreciate that sort of thing. And then the scene in the strip club or club in Beverly Hills or Los Angeles, probably greater Los Angeles. I'm sure they went across the border. Beverly Hills would never have such an establishment. Where they stopped the robbery, armed robbery. That was great. The blonde, one of two bad guys in that scene. I can't remember his name, but he's a well-known actor now. The whole hotel thing was good. And the action just was nonstop. So I thought it was a lot of fun. And I remember that's how I felt when I saw it the first time. And I was intrigued to contrast it to Axel F. So let me take the lead on that and then pitch it over to you. But with Axel F, Jay, obviously we have a very different Axel Foley. And it starts off in the city of Detroit. He's driving around and kids are flipping him off and the beggars are hitting him up for an extra dollar or two. And he's become, if not a part of the establishment itself. And he is as a big a part of Detroit as Detroit. And he's an institution within that city. The role he has is, he's still a detective. One would have to assume he's a pretty good detective to keep that job that long. And so that really led to him going out to Beverly Hills and reprising that role. But we had the additional component of his daughter, which we didn't know about in Beverly Hills Cop 1. And a very difficult, if not rapprochement, certainly reunion with father and daughter. And as a father of a 27-year-old, it was much more poignant to me to see that and to see his growth in the movie as a father. At one point, he says something like, "Look, we both made mistakes in this relationship." And I just thought, no, it's never the daughter's fault. You're the parent. And later on, he apologized for that, and rightly so. And so that whole scene, or series of scenes where he was an absentee father, he and his daughter's mother had split up. So she had grown up literally without him, and she was still pissed off about that. And unfortunately, children carry a lot of those things into adulthood, even if the parents don't recognize it at the time. So I thought that was pretty cool too. Taggart as the chief, I thought was just hilarious. Billy was still Billy, and he hadn't changed one iota. I don't know how he did it, but he didn't change in 40 years. So the part that I would maybe
Jeffrey
and Jeffrey. So, but I'm intrigued with movies that can literally go 40 years later. And I mentioned Top Gun, which had no sequels. And hopefully we'll get to that in this season of Popcorn and Compliance. But, obviously we had sequels to Beverly Hills Cop, and Beverly Hills Cop 2, I thought was good, not as good as the original. 3 was terrible. But essentially, you and I have bookended 40 years of movie and 40 years of growth of characters and 40 years of acting experience. And I thought Eddie Murphy as an actor was very good in Axel F. He seemed to hit all of the acting marks that I would have expected from an A-lister. So I really enjoyed watching that as well. When I went back to watch Beverly Hills Cop, I was surprised at the amateur-ish nature of his acting in some of the scenes. But, I think he was 22 when he made Beverly Hills Cop, or 23, and he hadn't made many movies and he hadn't gone through that process. So I really enjoyed that component of Axel F. What are some of your thoughts from the movie maker background?
Well, I think what you see here is we're talking about the sequel to Top Gun. We're talking about Axel F. And what a lot of that is about is intellectual property that is well known and embraced by a fan base. So if I say Axel F, you know what you're going to get. I don't have to explain it. And so, that the sequel to Top Gun. So some of this is very interesting that this is in the post-COVID era that you're going back. And it's not only that you're mining an original movie, but you're mining something from 40 years ago. So for something to still have validity, for something to still be good, in the pre-call, Tom, you and I were talking about the fact that Netflix pulled a quick one over Paramount. That this picture, in order for it to get financed, Netflix decided to take on the financial responsibility. And in addition to financing this picture, they also got an option to do Beverly Hills Cop 5. So they're looking pretty good with the number of views that they've had, that this is something that's going to allow them to move forward. We talked about some of the cameos and the characters, and then new people who were come in, Kevin Bacon, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. So they had a nice balance between the old people who make it comfortable for us to go, and then the new archetypes that move forward. I've never thought I'd see a helicopter chase where the helicopters do not get more than 1 foot off the ground. It was kind of bizarre, but it was kind of like, all right, well, let's see how we can do this differently. And I too share the interaction between Axel and his daughter. So you had it all together, and I think like you said, Tom, it'll be interesting looking at some of these other movies to see how well they've aged 20, 30, 40 years into the future. And, will they, I think you've got to realize when you're dealing with a sequel is you need to pull the plug at the right time. And there are very few sequels that not only gross more than their original, but they also have the creative validity for being there. One of the series I can think of maybe is Lethal Weapon, that each one of those movies, they introduced somebody new. So in the first one, it was Danny Glover, it was Mel Gibson, and it was Joe Pesci. And then in the next installment, they introduced somebody else. And then finally, they get to Rene Russo, who's almost as badass as Mel Gibson and blowing up and kicking up things. So not only did those characters age well, but they really seemed to put some love into it, some craft into it. And it's like, how can we raise the stakes every time further? So I think we're maybe halfway there with Axel F. There was some kind of rote and some kind of camp that went in there. But for the most part, I think they succeed. And it'll be interesting to see what they do with Beverly Hills Cop 5.
Jay, let me pick up on a couple of points you raised. One was the underlying intellectual property. I'm going to rephrase that to say, I remember when the first Spider-Man movie came out with Tobey Maguire, and I was talking to my aunt, and I said, the reason the movie is so good is because it's based on comic books that were so good, meaning the original story was very good. And they just put it in a movie format as opposed to a comic book format. You called it intellectual property, but if a story is good, does that lend itself to being mined for additional stories down the road, like we had obviously in comic books? But am I saying the same thing as you're saying, or is having intellectual property a little bit different?
No, I think I was limiting by not using the concept of storytelling. So let's say if a story is worth telling, you can do it 3 times, right? There are 3 different Spider-Men in the Spider-Verse, or whatever you want to call it. So I definitely agree that I think better term to use is if you have a great story, it's going to work no matter who the actors are, no matter what planet you set the story on. If the story is good, people will go along for the journey.
Jay, the other thing you talked about, I'd like to maybe explore a little bit, is the role of Netflix in all of this. And you talked about how they saw some value and also put kind of bet on the come that if this was a success, they had the right to a second or a sequel. Are we moving towards I don't want to say two-tiered movie system, but a dichotomy of movies that are made to go on a streaming platform to start with, and then something like Mission Impossible that is designed to start on the big screen? Or how do you see the role in Netflix and all of this moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good question, Tom. I think it remains to be played out, but there are certain things like A Handmaid's Tale and series like that who got really big during the pandemic, and now we're waiting. I think we're going to wait almost 2 years to see the finale of that, which started, like I said, several years before. So I would even dice it up even more, that you have series, whether it's 6 parts, 8 parts, 12 parts. You have that kind of stuff that initially has its audience, that it's built to be streamed. But then you have these other things like, you've got action adventure movies, you've got things that not only Netflix goes after, but you've got Prime and you've got Disney Plus. So right now, there's so many different places for you to camp your movies. They don't really look at it the same way that things used to look like in the box office era. So, they were talking about, I think that original Beverly Hills Cop did something like $134 million. And if you look at that in today's dollars, it's almost like $750 million. So back then, they had no idea. I was also reading some stuff about VHS, and initially they didn't want to have sell-through of their VHS and DVD copies, that they wanted to price the market in such a way that you would be incentivized to rent DVDs and CDs and VHS, but you wouldn't own them. And then basically Fox and Disney came up with this idea that it's not about the rental, but it's about the sell-through, and it's about having those end caps. Remember, there used to be Best Buys in Circuit City, and you'd pick up the newest DVD that came out on a Tuesday, and you thought it was pretty cheap, that you paid $24 or $19.99 or $15.99. So that was like a whole different model. And now what we're looking at is that you've got these streamers, and they don't really care about how long it's going to play in the movie theater. They just care that they're going to suck you in and get you into one of your platforms, and then they're going to have something that has more value going forward. So I don't know if I quite answered it, but I think we have different economic times now and different economic schemes and models. And that's going to see, like, another thing. Recently, Prime and Amazon bought the rights to the MGM library, which has been cut up and sold so many different times. But they basically bought MGM for $9.3 billion. Now, I'd like to see how Amazon is going to get a return on that investment, because that's a big number, and I don't know how you roll that up, and make it money going forward.
Well, Jay, this has been a great inaugural episode of a new season of Popcorn and Compliance. I can't wait to see what we come up with next.
Thanks, Tom.